Good evening. Thanks for joining us. The top stories today. Eurozone countries have finally agreed on a stimulus package days after beginning their talks. We have details and analysis. A new report says that up to 1/3 of New York's small businesses are at risk. Found that most of them don't have enough money to reopen. Some people are worried about the cost of another large stimulus plan, but we spoke with one organization today about just how beneficial the last one was for them. And the new bill seeks to hold big companies accountable for their use of slave labor in supply chains. A new report found that some big companies may be benefiting from forced labor in China. The S&P 500 edged higher on Tuesday with gains in energy, financial and industrial stocks. The blue chip Dow also rose, but the Nasdaq was pulled lower by a drop in tech shares. Second quarter reporting season rolled on with 58 of the S&P 500 now reporting. Refinitiv says almost 80% have come in above expectations, but remember, estimates were lowered as we approached reporting. Coca-Cola and Lockheed Martin among those that beat estimates. The Dow rose near 160 points today, or 0.6%. The S&P 500 gained over 5 points, or 0.17%, and the Nasdaq dropped about 87 points, or 0.81%. For the first time, the European Union will give out debt finance grants to member states. It follows days of tense negotiations over the EU's fiscal future. NTD's Christian Watchin is in Berlin.
European leaders emerging early Tuesday morning with a deal for a new 7-year budget as well as a pandemic recovery plan. It's a breakthrough following over 90 hours of sometimes tense negotiations at their first in-person summit since February.
The conclusions at this summit are truly historic.
At stake was the economic future of the EU, hit by the biggest recession since World War II. Southern member states like Italy are suffering especially hard and demanded more financial support from the EU.
This is a historical agreement, historical moment for the EU, because we have never had any kind of financial assistance instrument which consisted in large part of grants, a very good sign of solidarity between the member states.
During the euro debt crisis about 10 years ago, the EU only gave loans to affected states. This time, almost half of the more than $850 billion recovery fund are grants, money countries don't need to pay back. The so-called Frugal Five, a group of smaller, thrifty countries led by the Netherlands and Austria, were initially opposed to any grants. In a compromise, they managed to reduce the grants to $446 billion. Germany and France had wanted the grants to be more than $570 billion. For the first time, the EU will borrow money on the financial markets to pay for grants. The bloc plans to pay it back by 2058. To avoid the funds being used to fix government budget holes, member states receiving the money need to meet country-specific plans.
The ball is on the side of the member states to use this money, to use this opportunity to do the structural changes which are also demanded by the populations.
The New Deal still needs to be approved by the European Parliament in a special plenary session. Reporting by Christian Watchin, NTD News, Berlin.
We caught up with Daniel Lacalle in Madrid earlier today to get his thoughts on the plan. Daniel, great to have you back.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
Daniel, is the Eurozone going to get the kind of kickstart that it's hoping for, do you think?
I think it's going to be very difficult. These kind of recovery funds generate usually a perverse incentive for governments to malinvest, to massively increase current spending, and we have seen in the past, if we look at the 2009 Growth and Jobs Plan of the European Union and the Juncker Plan in 2012, that there is very little added growth, if any. So I think that we should not see the recovery fund as a tool for higher growth, but as something that will help the European Union overcome the challenges of the pandemic with a level of conditionality that may help strengthen, actually, the European Union.
And are there any safeguards in place for, say, malinvestment or misuse of the funds?
In this case, there are a few important differences with other occasions. I think that the fact that there is a conditionality clause, that the reception of grants is subject to the conditionality that we mentioned before, that governments will have to implement structural reforms in order to make the economy more competitive and to incentivize job creation, are likely to reduce the risk of malinvestment. However, if we look, for example, at the media, today in Spain or in Italy, the radical left is calling for massive increases in current spending and entitlements. That is not what these funds should be devoted to. And I think that the measures put in place in the agreement in order to prevent that level of excess are likely going to be exercised, and it's important to be prudent and responsible.
And I believe there's a possibility of veto in the control clause. What role could that play, do you think?
I think that that is an important factor, because if you look at the way that the funds will be provided to each country, the initial amount in 2021 is going to be actually pretty limited. In the case of Spain and Italy, it's about 5 billion. Then in 2022, it grows to about 22 billion. And then the vast majority arrives in 2023. This is important because this clause that we just mentioned might not be exactly a veto, but it is very much the same as one. It basically means that a member state can denounce that they believe that the funds are not used adequately and take it back to the Commission so that the Commission revises the way in which funds are going to be given to each country. I think that these elements and these clauses will generate an important effect in avoiding the risk of excess and bloated spending that inevitably would end up leading the European Union and the Eurozone into a debt crisis in 2022 or 2023. So the fact that there's conditionality and the fact that there are clauses that prevent these types of excesses, I think are important factors that we should take into account.
That's great, Daniel. We'll watch how it plays out. Thanks for the update.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
It says that 1/3 of small businesses in New York City may never reopen. That makes at least 40% of the city's jobs vulnerable.
A leading industry group says up to 1/3 of New York City's 230,000 small businesses may never reopen. That's according to a new report from the Partnership for New York City. The organization released its post-pandemic response plan Monday. It assesses the impact of the outbreak on New York and suggests actions for recovery. It found that most small businesses in New York City have less than 3 months' worth of cash reserves. This means that funds to restart, pay back rent, and buy inventory are exhausted. The report also said the sudden freeze on travel and tourism had a devastating impact on the hospitality, retail, and food service industries. More than 2 out of every 5 vulnerable jobs in New York City are in small businesses that employ fewer than 100 people. The biggest challenges to business owners, according to the report, are high rents, regulatory burdens, and taxes. The study says any recovery must be based on solid health measures in place to deal with a resurgence. That includes a robust testing and tracing program. Other action points include greater capital access and technical assistance for small businesses, as well as regulatory and tax reform.
Trouble in New York and trouble in Louisiana too. A rental assistance program in the state is being suspended just days after launching. Over 40,000 people applied, more than it could handle. Now it's waiting for additional funds before it can reopen.
An emergency rental assistance program in Louisiana was suspended after just 4 days due to overwhelming demand. The Louisiana governor's office says more than 40,000 residents applied for the program when they only had funds for 10,000 residents. The program was meant to help applicants facing evictions and financial hardship due to the CCP virus. Qualified tenants would receive a lump sum payment sent to their landlords or management companies. The amount of assistance is based on income. The program is funded by U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. It has a $24 million budget. $7 million is available now, with the rest arriving later. The governor's office said the program will reopen once more funds are available. It's not yet known how recipients will be selected from the overflow of applicants. The Louisiana Housing Corporation, which oversees the program, says it's optimistic more federal dollars will be available as soon as possible.
The White House and Congress remain locked in negotiations over the next virus aid deal. The next package is likely to reach over $1 trillion. Negotiators have to agree on how the new round of money can reopen schools, prop up small businesses, and boost virus testing, and also keep cash flowing to Americans. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says low-income earners will get a new round of direct payments. President Trump, he wants to include a payroll tax cut. Democrats want billions for schools and local governments. The GOP is likely to go with a $1 trillion proposal, while House Democrats, they seek $3 trillion. McConnell said Washington must develop a strategy to safely reopen schools and businesses until a vaccine can be found. All sides need to reach a deal by the end of the month before critical measures expire. With the new stimulus plan in the works, we wanted to speak with someone who benefited from the last one. Operation Hope in Chicago was very excited to speak with us, and they praised the Paycheck Protection Program, saying it kept them going through the crisis. Brian, thanks so much for coming on. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
And Brian, I know Operation Hope, you're very grateful recipients of the Paycheck Protection Program grant. Before we get into that, why don't you give us an idea of what Operation Hope does?
Perfect. Yes, I'd be more than happy to. So Operation Hope was founded after the Rodney King riots in 1992. And our mission is really to drive financial inclusion and empowerment in low to moderate income communities. And we do that through several different channels. We offer credit and money management for adults. We also have a small business entrepreneurship program and a home ownership program, along with our disaster preparedness, which we partner with Red Cross and FEMA. So we have multiple different channels of how we can invest in our communities so that we can get credit scores up and individuals participating in the banking system and allow them to grow their financial wealth and financial independence.
I think it's awesome. You know, I always say that if the broader community had a good, solid understanding of financials and economics, I feel the whole place could be much more harmonious and great place. Can you give us an example of a typical type of person you might help?
Yeah, so a lot of the people we help are very distrusting of the financial system. They may have been burned by a bad experience, or they just might not be in a household that really thought about their finances. A lot of our clients, what we say, really didn't get the memo on how banking works, how their credit score works, how they could use that to get a lower interest credit card, how they could purchase their first home or open a small business. You know, all of those factors really improve the community, not only that individual. So, you know, if you get a community where the average credit score is 700, you're going to see less crime. You're going to see more involvement from the community. So it's really a community uplift project that starts with one person at a time.
That's awesome. And how did the PPP program help you guys?
The PPP program was phenomenal. You know, as we started navigating through COVID-19, we had to shut down all of our physical locations where our clients come to see us. As a nonprofit, we were really nervous and uncertain as to what the future would hold. After you've learned a little bit about our services, the last thing we wanted to do was to have to lay off, reduce our employment size, or furlough employees, because the communities really needed us during that time. And they continue to need us during this time as they navigate through COVID-19's impacts on the economy. So we were able to maintain full staffing. We were able to bridge that gap until we could get better on get our feet more grounded in what the new normal would look like. So we were able to bridge that gap so we could identify all of our solutions, that we would have opportunities to put in place to continue the great services we provide in the community.
I'm delighted to hear it. And how are the prospects for you looking forward, do you feel?
We're very fortunate that a lot of our partners, our financial institution partners, government partners, have really stepped up and kind of seen that Operation Hope's mission for the last 26 years is more important than ever. We not only have the economic crisis, we've got social unrest, and we believe the solutions we provide will address both of those issues. So a lot of our financial partners have stepped up and given a specific COVID-19 funding. So we're on much more solid ground. Of course, we play this day by day as a nonprofit and take nothing for granted.
Yeah, well, I think you guys are offering an awesome service to the community, Brian, and I'm so glad that the program was able to help you guys through the difficult times. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Senator Josh Hawley wants to know if American companies are using slave labor in their products. He's introduced a bill after a new report says some large corporations could be benefiting from forced labor in China. Patrick Hayden has the details.
US Senator Josh Hawley is introducing a bill to make sure large American companies aren't using slave labor in supply chains. The Slave-Free Business Certification Act expands supply chain transparency requirements and orders regular audits. It also mandates CEOs to certify that their company's products do not rely on forced or slave labor. Companies that fail to meet these basic standards will be penalized. The bill comes off the back of a report by an Australian think tank that says more than 80 companies have been tied to forced labor in China. Some of the companies implicated in the report were Amazon, Nike, North Face, BMW and Gap. Hawley wrote on Twitter, "I challenge every major American corporation making products overseas in China or elsewhere to pledge that they are slave-free and that they do not and will not rely on forced slave labor." The Chinese communist regime is well known for using prisoners of conscience in its labor camps. Two of the largest targeted groups are Falun Gong practitioners and ethnic Uyghurs. Hawley's office wrote that the issues extend beyond China. For example, Starbucks and Nespresso rely on unpaid Brazilian workers who are denied basic needs like food and water.
Still to come. Yet another large corporation sends workers packing. LinkedIn is cutting 6% of its workforce. And if you haven't heard about Aldi before, you will soon. The discount grocer is gaining ground on household names like Walmart as it expands nationwide. More on that after the break.
大提琴不仅仅是一件乐器，它是有生命、有感情的，需要我们精心的照顾。往往我们一个小小的动作，可能都会对人情绪产生微妙的影响。天音的品牌是福星，我们对于传统的理念很荣幸， 被神韵艺术团选为指定供应商。时间是酿造音色的不可替代的陪伴。我跟大提琴已经有60多年的友情了，每一把琴都有它自己的个性，熟悉它，才能真正发挥它的潜力。所以，我希望给你的每一把琴，都是首先我所信任的。
LinkedIn says it's laying off 6% of its global workforce, has nearly 1,000 jobs. It's just one of the many corporations announcing layoffs. The job cuts are across its global sales and hiring sections, but the company's CEO said no further layoffs are planned. Employees will receive at least 10 weeks of severance pay and, here in the US, a year of continued health coverage. This comes as the U.S. unemployment rate remains at 11.1%, suggesting companies nationwide are still cutting jobs. And consumer spending may be down, but Americans did splash out on big TVs during the lockdowns.
Research found that consumers were buying TV sets at levels usually seen during the holiday season. In the first half of 2020, sales of 65-inch TVs or larger were up more than 50%. That technology helped keep people busy and entertained while they were stuck at home. Along with the TVs, there was also a sales surge for soundbars, streaming players, and mounts. But the growth may not change the projected decline in technology sales. The Consumer Technology Association forecasts a 2% decrease for 2020.
Aldi, the discount grocery chain, is planning to add dozens of new stores this year in America. And unlike most companies, it's actually getting a boost from the pandemic.
Discount grocer Aldi says it will open more than 70 new stores this year. It's part of an ambitious 5-year plan to become the third largest U.S. grocer, behind Walmart and Kroger. The company hopes to have 2,500 stores by 2022. The German company opened its first U.S. store in 1976. It focuses on low-cost, quality products and money-saving business practices. The company said it will invest over $5 billion to build new stores, remodel existing ones, and expand its selection. Aldi has seen rapid progress. It now has about 2,000 stores. It's not far behind Kroger, which has nearly 2,800. It has increased its fresh food selection by 40% and hopes to have curbside pickup available at 600 stores by the end of the month. And the pandemic isn't hurting Aldi's progress. Grocery spending is up 10% compared to last year. Rising food prices coupled with high unemployment means customers are looking more and more to value chains like Aldi for better deals.
And coming up, domestic tourism is on the up in Sydney, Australia, and tourism companies are trying to adapt. That and more after the break. Standard & Poor's says Hong Kong's specialness is being eroded, and the island could see its estimated growth potential cut in half over the next decade, or even plunge to zero. The rating agency says Hong Kong's decoupling from the US and a rise in political unrest are the reasons for the gloomy forecast. Washington is reviewing Hong Kong's special status after China imposes new national security law. Hong Kong's financial industry is a cornerstone of the city's prosperity. It accounts for nearly 1/5 of the economy. It's almost double the level it had more than 20 years ago. And Australia's most populous city, Sydney, is finding ways to adapt. A city usually popular among international visitors is now refocusing its efforts on the local tourism industry during the international border closure.
Climbing Sydney's iconic harbour bridge is a once-in-a-lifetime experience for many international tourists visiting Australia. Before the pandemic, 60% of bridge climb's business came from international markets. Australia's border close in March strongly impacted the business. The CEO of Bridge Climb Sydney said the company is refocusing on the domestic market.
There's 4.4 million people roughly that live in Sydney. That's a pretty big market, and then when you have Brisbane and Melbourne added on top of that, that's quite a lot of people.
It has introduced discounted tickets to attract local customers and is confident to survive solely on the domestic tourist market. That's if international borders remain closed long term. Another famous restaurant based in Sydney's central business district is also feeling the loss of its usual customer. International visitors made up to 80% of restaurant bookings before the border closed. And the restaurant is now facing a new hurdle. Bookings from Melbourne residents traveling to Sydney are down due to a newly introduced lockdown since Melbourne saw a recent spike in the number of virus cases.
And you kind of okay, it's still here and it's not going away, and we have to just keep on doing what we do and trying to minimize those risks.
The restaurant's executive chef says that state border closures and the lockdown in Melbourne is not only blocking customers, it's also disrupting supply lines for ingredients.
We'll just have to adapt and do something else and kind of hope the suppliers kind of can afford and will reopen.
It was reported by Tourism Research Australia that more than 2/3 of the growth in tourism in Australia came from domestic travellers over the last decade. In a future uncertain over international travel, it may well be a trend set to continue.
That's the latest business updates for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you again tomorrow.